Hello, welcome to today's edition of Pegasus Test. On today's edition, we're going to go over transportation of firearms. One question I've been asked a lot about Finnish brutality is, how did you as an American get your guns to Finland? And it's a great question, and to be straight up honest, it's not an easy process, and you kind of got to commit to it early on. There are two ways to get your firearms to Finland. The first way is the way I did it. I sent mine as cargo, in advance of what I was doing. And there were a lot of reasons for that. And one of those reasons was, in my real job, instead of making YouTube videos, I know it's hard to believe, is actually in international logistics. And I move firearms all the time. So I kind of knew the ins and outs of doing it as cargo. The second reason for doing that was on the trip to Finland, I had a lot of stops to make just besides the match. I flew over, I was in Iceland first, then I went to Finland. I had a few days before the match. And then after the match, I had a few other days in Helsinki. So one of the things I didn't want to be doing everywhere I went was dealing with having to carry and secure firearms in a nation that doesn't understand them in the way that we do in America. And by sending them as cargo, it gave me freedom of movement. To send it by cargo, the first thing you have to do is get a Finnish import permit. And this applies whether you send by cargo or you bring them with you. And bring them with you we'll cover later in the video. To get that import permit in Finland, you have to have a friend in Finland because it has to be done in person. So you have to give power of attorney to someone in Finland that you trust or is willing to help you. And they have to go to the police on your behalf to help you get the permit. It will also require some corresponding with the Finnish embassy in Washington, D.C. or one of their consulates throughout the country. I believe they have one in San Francisco and New York as well. And you have to coordinate with them to get some documents certified. You have to pay a nominal fee. And then once that's done, the police will issue your import permit. Now, to go out as cargo, you also need a license from the United States State Department. I got one called a DSP-73. And the DSP-73 allows for the temporary export of ITAR-controlled items. And yes, let me be absolutely clear here. Your civilian legal AR-15 and your pistol, whichever you said, is an ITAR-controlled item. And you will get in serious trouble if you do not have the proper licensing. So I then applied to the State Department, and I've got my DSP-73. And then the third document I got is called a carnet. It's spelled carnet, but pronounced carnet. And it's essentially a passport for freight. And this allowed the cargo to exit the United States. It proof as it exited, and when it got to Finland, it was able to enter into Finnish commerce. And everybody recognized that, hey, this is just here temporarily, so there were new duties and tax issues that had to be dealt with. And then the reverse happens when the match was over and I sent the items back out as cargo. You know, it was logged out, there was no duty or VAT to be paid, and then the cargo was shipped back. When it arrived back in the United States, I worked with U.S. Customs, presenting the licenses and the carnet, and then they released my freight back to me because these are my personal items. That is a very long and complicated process, and you have to commit to it very early. These do not happen quick. You're working with two foreign governments, neither of which move with a great speed, because governments don't move with great speed on anything. Also, this year was particularly challenged as U.S. State Department has been backed up on licensing due to the government shutdown at the beginning of the year. And they're just now, here in the latter half of the year, beginning to catch up. So it's not a fast process, and it's not a last-minute process. And it's a process that you have to do in order. You have to have your import permit to get your export permit. And once you have those, then you can get a carnet, which simplifies the customs clearance process in both countries, and it's a very essential item. Now, as easy and convenient as this sounds, it's not inexpensive. I spent $100 at the embassy getting my permit. I spent well more than that with the U.S. State Department, and my company is registered with the State Department. So a private citizen, you can't just go, oh, I just want to do this one-time license. Well, actually, you can do that. It's very expensive. Thousands of dollars of fees that will have to be paid. So this was a unique set of circumstances open to me, and I took advantage of them. Now, the second way to take your firearm from the United States to Finland is to carry it as your checked baggage. And be very careful. This is a place you can get in a lot of trouble. And please do not constitute anything I'm telling you here as legal advice, because it's not. I'm just telling you what I did and what worked for me. To reiterate this, you still need a friend in Finland to go interact with the police to get you your proper import permit. And this is very critical because there's different ways to import items. You know, are you using it for competition? Are you doing it for commercial sale? Are you going hunting, etc., etc.? And each of them requires a slightly different permit. And this permit, in addition to allowing you to import your firearms into Finland, allows you to possess them. So if you have to interact with police or customs, and why do you, as an American and not being Finnish, have these firearms? You can say, hey, I have this license and everything. This allows me to do this. This is very, very important, and it cannot be overlooked. It's the first step you have to get accomplished. Once you have your import permit, then you have to go to U.S. Customs, get a form called 4457 that identifies this as your property, and you will have to take your firearms and any associated gear down to Customs and show them that this is what I'm taking, and they will check and verify your serial numbers. So that's another commitment you're making is, hey, that's the rifle I'm going to use. You can't last minute go, oh wow, you know, I think this rifle will be better, so I'm going to change them. No, once you get these permits, you're committed to the firearms that you're using. The U.S. Customs will sign off your 4457, and it's good for a year. And that will allow you to exit the United States with this firearm. And of course you have your permit. The next part gets really tricky because you have laws of other countries involved, and that includes the laws of the countries that you're transiting to get to Finland. And most EU countries want their own set of permits. And I have heard horror stories of gentlemen who say, we're going to some destination in Europe and got off the plane in France or the UK to make a connection, and their guns didn't leave with them. Those governments seized their guns. The Germans are very famous for detaining firearms if they don't have their permits filled out. And so you can get a lot of trouble in the flights you select. My research, and it's by no means all-inclusive, you have to do your own, is there was exactly one flight from the United States direct to Helsinki that this would work on, and that was Finnair Flight 6 from New York to Helsinki. All the other Finnair flights stop in the UK or Ireland, EU rules kick in, or other airlines you transit through other European hubs such as Germany, Italy, Spain, etc., etc., etc. And those countries' rules kick in. And it makes carrying the firearms with you practically impossible. So it's a very narrow window of flights that you can take your firearms on. Other nations that I researched, it was all a little hodgepodge different. Sometimes the nation didn't have a problem with firearms, but the airline did. Or sometimes the airline's policy was so unclear that you were unable to know if you were in compliance for a lot or not. For example, one airline that was transiting a European country didn't care that you were transiting your country because you had permits from your origin and your destination country, but the airline was like, you can't take a military type firearm. What does this look like? We all know an AR-15 is not a military firearm, but sure does look like one, doesn't it? And the average airline person is not gun savvy, and they will always err on the side of caution, so the answer will always be no, unless you can force them otherwise. And do you really want to have that battle? So, traveling with your firearms internationally, it's challenging. Do not take this video as an all-encompassing means of what to do, but take it as an overview of things you need to look into. And I'm talking of the perspective of someone who traveled from the United States to Finland for a competition. If you are in another foreign country, you have to comply with your country's rules and also Finland's rules. And that's not to be taken lightly. Governments, rightly so, consider the movement of firearms across their borders a very important thing, and they take it highly, highly personally when you don't comply with their laws. And each of these violations come with hefty fines and imprisonment. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and you can get your trip that's going to be a trip of a lifetime, where you're going to have the blast of a lifetime, and it can be ruined in a heartbeat if you don't follow the rules. We'd like to thank you for tuning into this edition of Pegasus Tests. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and tune in for more informational videos.